Hello and welcome to a new episode of AI Workflows. I'm Frederick, co-founder of ZepDeck, an AI platform that helps companies create presentations with AI in a consistent and controllable way. Over the last months, we have spoken with many companies about how they are implementing AI across their organizations. And one thing comes up repeatedly. A lot of companies are investing heavily into AI, but very few are actually measuring the impact in a structured way. At first, many AI initiatives create excitement, teams experiment, new tools are introduced, processes are changing. But sooner or later, management starts asking the big questions. Was the investment actually worth it? And what business impact did we create? If companies can't answer those questions clearly, AI projects often lose momentum or even get cancelled entirely. So in today's episode, we'll talk about how organizations can properly define, measure, and communicate KPIs and ROI for AI initiatives. And for today's episode, I'm joined by Catalina Panoiu. She is Global Senior Innovation Manager at CMS Legal and has previously led AI initiatives in various companies, including at Coca-Cola Europacific and Hyundai. Catalina, great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me here, Frederick. I have a feeling this is going to be a very, very interesting conversation on the most timely subject of the day.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And as I mentioned already in the introduction, you have been working in the field of AI for quite a few years now. How did you actually get into the field of AI? And also connected to our topic of today's episode, what was the first time that you realized that measuring ROI is really important for companies?
Honestly, I stumbled into AI back in 2017 when I was leading innovation for Norton Rose Fulbright Australia. Coincidentally, it's also a major global law firm. And my first AI project was actually building Australia's first data privacy chatbot. Now, the technology was very far from today's performance, so we spent quite a bit of time to get accuracy on what was just a set of less than 20 questions based on the new Data Privacy Act. Today, I can do the same in about 30 minutes with the AI we have here, even if I put in the GDPR, the EU AI Act, and everything else. Now, at the time, as you mentioned, there was a lot of fun building the chatbot. We also applied AI on contract automations, claims, and so on. Where it became extraordinarily clear that we were not measuring ROI correctly and that we were failing to actually get value systemically from the technology was during a subsequent tenure with Bouygues Energies and Services, where I was using AI in major infrastructure projects, smart cities, smart buildings, and so on. We had fantastic engineers. We could barely prove ROI in a business sense for the very cool applications we were building. So just around 2021, I started thinking very, very seriously about how we can actually put KPIs and select projects that will have an actual demonstrated business impact.
Mm. Can I ask out of interest what happened with this smart city project after no ROI could be proven?
I mean, honestly, that one continued simply because it was a very nice application in terms of engineering. However, it was built into a major 5-year contract. So you're looking at a very small investment in terms of what is being delivered to the client. You're not looking at a build that would automate entire functionalities. And that's what I mean by we did not use the technology, in my opinion, to its fullest extent, because that would have meant a full workflow automation, for which I think the market was not ready at the time. So they're basically just running AI in very particular points, checking the data, automating certain alerts, and so on. Very punctual use rather than full workflow automation.
Okay, and so you have worked in all these different companies in your own career. You are also talking to other AI professionals. What's your feeling? How many companies are properly measuring ROI for their AI initiatives as of today? And do you feel it changed over the past years?
I would say that just about 80% are making an effort at measuring some form of ROI. However, most of the things they're measuring are purely output. their activity. There are hours that people spend on Copilot. They are number of tokens utilized. They are superficial level adoption of particular applications. What I don't hear that much of, unfortunately, is the actual impact, for example, on customer experience or on employee satisfaction or on really cutting a workflow that used to be the most boring of all times and the most prone to human error to 3 clicks on a workflow automation platform. That I see a lot less of, but I do see it, that said. So I think just about 10 to 20% are really using very clear KPI frameworks to prioritize projects and build them, and then to measure the impact of it. And that's a major change over the past years, because just about 2.5 years ago, everyone was in a flurry testing ChatGPT and figuring out how to get it past the corporate firewall. Whereas today, just like with innovation, we're getting to that maturity point in the curve where companies are starting to ask questions, where the executive teams are starting to ask people, you've been playing with these toys for a while, and we've let you play with them. Now, do they actually bring anything? Do they bring something to our clients? Do they change the way we work? Is this really a new era?
Yep.
So that's a very recent change. I think those conversations have been going on this year. I suspect a little bit under the influence of the economic conditions, but luckily they are happening.
Yeah, and so when we work with customers, we often tell them right from the start, you should think about how you want to measure the results in the end, because you need to think about, okay, what's the outcome that you want to achieve, and start with this measurement already during a pilot phase. But then sometimes we get as an answer, yeah, we were measuring this in the past, but it wasn't really that impactful to measure it, to get these measurements. And so they say, we don't measure it for this project, it's fine. How would you convince someone that they should measure it anyway?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is ask them why it wasn't impactful. So what are we dealing with here? Is this discretionary budget that's being used for POC or for a small experiment, and there's no intention of actually selling it further on and implementing it at scale? Or is there something that's related to the way the company works, which is, for example, very high tolerance for slow change that actually does not make it urgent to measure the KPIs and the results in the short term? Now, I will say that the latter part of the market that has endless patience for change is very limited. But once I figured out the why, honestly, I would advise them to still at least set some objectives, because whilst you can do without the quantitative data, let's say you're not going to go into entire satisfaction questionnaires because people are overloaded and you're not going to get their attention. But at least there needs to be some objectives set in terms of either efficiency or better quality or more projects handled by the same team. What I hear every day from my stakeholders is, how can we do more with the same amount of people? So unless those objectives are set, sooner or later, somebody's going to start asking questions and there will be a reckoning. So to avoid that, maybe set them up from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I think that part of the reason is that they measured in the previous projects exactly those usage-based KPIs that you mentioned. So like how many tokens were processed or how often did people log in. What do you think? I mean, okay, so I assume, why do people measure these usage-based KPIs? Because they're easy to measure, right? What are different strategies of measuring KPIs? What are different kinds of KPIs that companies could measure?
I would always go back to the basics. I'm gonna go with Marcus Aurelius on this one. Of each thing, ask what it is. So, what are you solving? What is the main problem? That is your KPI. In your case, because you're looking at presentations, it may just be that you have a very high volume of presentations, but you have wildly differing levels of quality amongst those presentations, depending on who makes them, depending on what library they're using, or whatever PowerPoint that's been saved on their desktop since 1987. So if that is the problem you're solving for, then your KPIs will be around the quality and the uniformity of the quality across all the PowerPoints that are used. You may also want to add to that upskilling, or even going a layer down, juniors that are able to produce PowerPoints at the same level of quality as a partner level might, for example. But I do think they are, they sit in three buckets. They're either related to the experience, they're related to the quality, or they're related to efficiency. But they do need to be thought about punctually, project per project, and they need to liaise with the problem you're solving. And I think, to your point earlier, it's very easy to measure activity. The platforms spit out data at you, and it's very easy to hide behind a certain percentage or a famously high number of clicks. What is more difficult is to go back a step and say, well, why did we do this? Exactly. What are we solving for? But I do think it's a lot more impactful. So it's worth taking that half an hour and thinking through it.
Yeah. And I mean, if you measure usage of a product, it could be that the product wasn't good and that's why people didn't use it. But it could also be that they were never properly onboarded and there was no information for them to use it in the first place. So it can tell you even much more perhaps about how you roll out the AI products in the company and how you train people and things like this. I guess the other issue that I see with measuring more like later stage KPIs, like, okay, how much faster did you get? How much better are the results compared to not using an AI? Is that they are so far away, right, from the actual usage of the product. And maybe you are not able to measure anything there because there were some other influences on these KPIs that kind of added noise to the measurement. Do you have any idea how companies can go around these issues when measuring the KPIs?
Yeah, so let me first talk about the general point, which is how do you actually look at the impact that AI is making at a systemic level in a company? And the reality is that the metrics we have today that are technology-based, that are derived from the principles of IT, are not a good fit for AI, because we look at AI as a transformational technology. That means it changes human behavior, it changes the relationships between different business units, and it changes the way we produce an output, depending how far you push the technology. So something like usage may be relevant perhaps in the first year when you're looking at superficial adoption and you want to make sure 80% of your people have actually logged in. But once you're past that superficial stage, what you actually want to look at is the sophisticated use. And there, it won't be the product that will tell you how it's being used. It will be the various teams that have been trained and that have been tasked with identifying where the product fits in their workflows. So I would turn it around in terms of how you measure that ROI and go back to the team objectives once again and say, okay, if the objective for the year was to improve the quality of output by 30%, and you need to prove that you've improved it by 30%, but nobody will dictate how you do so. You can train your people, you can get external consultants, you can apply AI, you can do a mix of all. At the end, when you actually look at it, you can extrapolate and see what had the most impact. Because you look at the various strategies, and if you want to get all scientific about it, you could even do ABC testing and have 3 different batches, one using AI, one using consultants, one training their people, and see which one performs better. But I think the easiest and the smoothest way to not create unnecessary competition really is to go back to those business objectives and then look at the impact AI had in achieving them. And I suspect that in some areas, this will be a lot easier. Let's say a financial closing, where it's going to be quite easy to see that if you've automated the whole process, everyone's happy and you're getting the same accuracy. It will be a lot more difficult when you're looking at something business development related, because there are so many stakeholders and so many things that can get in between. So there you would have to apply a bit of leverage and to say, okay, let's look at this more at macro level and see the trends rather than attempt to get super scientific. And at the end of the day, just getting data that's not necessarily insightful.
And I'm thinking, because you mentioned the business objectives, there's a lot of additional KPIs that I would probably recommend a company to take a look at that help it control that the outcome that is generated is also up to the level that was previously there, right? So that you don't only just make things faster, but that you also control that the quality, the consistency of the results that are generated are at least at the same level, if not even better. How would you recommend for a company to approach this, to identify not only, okay, what is in our business objectives, but what are all the other things that we should include for a full picture?
It's a very good question, and I do think it requires the executive teams to actually look at it. I like to keep things simple because it's an emerging technology and there are so many moving parts. I like to start with literally 3 categories of potential KPIs that will apply to all business units. And that's what I advise companies I work with. You'll really have one that is related to the customer experience and the quality of that customer experience. And these can be quantitative or qualitative KPIs. You can look at how fast the lead is progressing through the funnel and how fast they say how happy they are with how they're progressing. Or you could look at customer service and see whether AI is improving things there in terms, again, of quality and of customer experience. The second one is around efficiency. And I know everyone gets hung up on all the time that AI is saving us. That's because they only calculate the actual use of it. They don't calculate the training and the adoption efforts that are required. So over there, you'll have all that time and cost savings and so on, which are often overstated or overestimated because they're only partially calculated. And then there's a really big piece that we always forget about, which is capability building. Organizations are live organisms. People need to continue learning. So unless we can see that AI is helping them develop new capabilities and is helping them be better at what they do, that's something that may come and hinder in the future. And there's more and more research on this that's coming out in terms of people's skills getting atrophied because they're not exploring enough. So I would look at these 3 buckets: customer experience, efficiency, core capabilities, and ongoing learning. That would be a framework that I would say the executive team would want to work on, would want to appropriate, would want to make their own, turn into their corporate language, and then ask the next layers to identify their own KPIs so that every quarter you can come back that executive team and say, this is what I've achieved. And it may just be that one team's really pushing efficiency and another one's really pushing capabilities. But overall, that portfolio should start making sense by the end of the first year, because otherwise, if you're just looking at usage, all you're going to have to take back to an executive team who truly doesn't care about clicks is, I've got 92% that logged in. And then the question will come, so what?
Exactly.
And you can kind of understand the question.
I mean, I think if you compare these 3 levels that you just explained with this usage-based metric, I feel like it gets very clear what the difference is because the usage really doesn't tell you anything about the things that you just mentioned. What I find very interesting about what you just said is that this whole aspect of how does it change, how employees learn new things, how they develop their own skills is almost like a meta level on top of the different initiatives and tools that you introduce. So I'm wondering, maybe taking the next step. So you have all these KPIs that you measure. I guess the next question is who owns these KPIs in terms of who's responsible for driving them forward and also making sure that you reach your targets.
I would say that it's a joint ownership at executive level, where you would most certainly want your CEO to own and to drive any type of AI transformation. If he or she is not interested in doing so, chances are there will not be enough energy behind it. So you will want the C-level to own it ultimately, and to be interested enough in the reports to hear about them for 5 minutes on a quarterly basis. You would probably want IT and innovation, depending on how the company is structured. I've seen IT folded under innovation. I have my own thoughts about that. I've seen innovation stand alone. I've seen it in many combinations. But I would think that you would want innovation, IT, and potentially strategy to chip in. In many cases, learning and development does so as well, because they're keenly interested in the capability building. So you'd want a working group, if you will, that advises the C-level and that takes this forward. Ultimately, in operational terms, the ones who need to own it are the business unit leaders. So if you've got somebody who, for example, is head of sales and who's presented with this framework and is asked to make it his or her own and identify their KPIs and find a way to get their people to drive these forward. Unless the drive is on the business side, in my experience, it will not work. Honestly, I have not seen a single company where it works when the topic is buried somewhere in IT or in technology, for the very simple reason that you add another layer and it comes with very much of a technology perspective rather than a business one. It's very different if you ask the business leaders themselves, the heads of the units, to own this transformation, to drive it, to make it their own, to make it a collaborative effort with their teams, rather than say, yo, all you people, we got a new AI tool. Ask IT for access. Yeah, it needs to be owned. It needs to be, especially because it's a topic that can make quite a few people quite anxious about their job prospects and so on. To me, it is critical that it's the businesses that drive it. And in all the smart companies I know, it is the heads of the business units that are operationally responsible for selecting, committing to their KPIs, and driving them forward.
Yeah. I feel like what we have developed now as a framework for this measurement of KPIs is almost a bit bottom-up driven, right? So we look at, okay, we have the different initiatives. We want to know how they impact the operational performance. We want to control user experience, maybe other qualitative criteria. And then on top, we also want to look at how does it actually change the performance of our workforce in the long term, the education, the motivation, and so on. Now I'm thinking, maybe there is another top-down view on how is the company as a whole proceeding in terms of literacy across the company, or how much people know about AI, how much openness is there to use it. Is that also something that you would include in such a framework?
I would, except I will say this with a caveat. It would take a very advanced company to be able to measure this. It's similar in my experience. Whilst AI to me is very similar to innovation, which is why to me it's always been blended throughout my career. To me, everything that's capability building, the meta thinking of it, the advancement in terms of capabilities is quite similar to culture change, which is fiendishly difficult to measure. And it may be better in that case to not measure on a quarterly basis, but instead find a way to measure it year for year and to really build that in so that you see the behavioral changes, the process changes, and so on. And to have quite a high tolerance for this being an emerging process, because in my experience, what you'll see in the beginning is really some early adopters that are driving it through, and you'll see some incredible creativity at work on how they use tools, and others adopting it more slowly, which does not mean the organization is not developing the capabilities. It just means it's running on several speeds, and you need to see whether you need to calibrate support for those. But it is one that's very, very difficult to measure, I have to say. It's, I think it's going to be a conundrum for learning and development for years to come.
Yeah. And I think it's such an important aspect, because oftentimes when you have people in the organization that are really open to innovate and to apply AI, and they have even this hunger to try out new things and experiment, then you can make up for a lot of other things that might be missing. And you will also probably see higher adoption, higher effectiveness of the tools that you use in the company. So I'm thinking maybe to measure this as a company, and then to start thinking about initiatives. How can we raise this excitement about AI, this openness, teach people about it, is something that can come from it, which kind of interludes to the next question that I would have, which is, so we're measuring all these KPIs. We have people that are supposed to look at them. What are they supposed to do and to learn from it when they see that the KPI isn't great? What are the consequences that follow?
Well, see, this is where the fact that it's an emerging technology in an emerging space is quite an advantage, because I expect that we'll be making a lot of new mistakes. I'm hoping we're not going to make the old ones all over again, but we're going to experiment quite a bit, which means that those experiments, at least half of them, will not yield the results that we expect. And once again, the executive team will need to have tolerance for that fact, and will need to allow that playfulness to happen rather than expect a cascade approach where, for some reason, everyone's been trained, everyone should know how to use it. Everyone's AI literate. It doesn't happen that way. That's an illusion. So I think the first thing to do is look at what is going on with that KPI. So is it something that has been completely undershot? So, the objective was an improvement of 50% and 10% was delivered, for example. The next question is why? And that's where you need to go granular. You need to understand very clearly whether this was a matter of technology, and perhaps even something as uncomplicated as the firewall not allowing the full technology to be deployed. This will happen, and it does regularly. Whether it's a matter of actual adoption, in which case is it because people were not trained or because they weren't involved in how the functionalities were built? Or is it something as simple as this was never going to yield 50%, it was over optimistic. At most, we were going to achieve 20%. In our current state, we got 10. It's not that bad. I think what's really important is to just take that step back and run the analysis before going into a panic and saying, we undershot this by a massive amount. We need to absolutely change it, or we need to absolutely achieve it. And I think it's also worth at the beginning being very realistic. And I know it's something that most of my stakeholders don't want to hear. You should see the startups I work with. Do not overpromise and underdeliver. Underpromise and overdeliver. If you expect to, I've got some stakeholders that I hear, especially external vendors, that will say, this is going to save 80% of the time. My 10 years of experience with the tech have taught me that no AI solution saves ever more than 30% of the time on a workflow. So when I hear 80%, my eyebrows go up and I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting. But the most important piece really is to use it as a learning opportunity. Do not use it as a panic moment. Do not use it to bash the technology either. Because, something that can surreptitiously happen is that adoption is being slightly sabotaged by those it should be driven by, in the sense that the technology may appear so powerful, or there may be so much techno anxiety around it, that they prefer to prove that it won't work that way. So that's why right now, in such an emerging field, you take it, you analyze it, you run the post-mortem of it, and then you calibrate the actions, rather than freak out and say, oh my God, what have we done?
Yeah, I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that there are all these different motivations and agendas around measuring KPIs. Yeah, and I guess on these 30% versus 80% time improvement, I guess for a lot of the AI initiatives that companies work on, it's maybe also the wrong expectation to see like this top amount of potential productivity increase right away. So I'm just wondering, how can companies perhaps also build this openness to say, okay, we achieved 10% improvement in the first pilot. Now let's look at what we can further improve. And then the next round, we will be even better. I feel like right now with a lot of companies, it's rather the opposite. They say, if the first trial doesn't lead to the full potential, then we move on and we cancel the initiative altogether.
I think I think this one harks really back to the business leaders. And what I'll say there is that, if I put myself in your shoes as a startup, this is something that I would test with my client for a POC immediately. so that I see whether they have in mind a longer term transformation and they're really thinking strategically about how they need to transform their team and where AI fits, independent of the AI they're rolling out, because they will roll out several solutions at the same time and measure them, or whether they're just thinking about it very punctually, very transactionally, and saying, oh, I'm going to test this and I'll see if it works or it doesn't. Because I think that really makes the difference. And in my experience, is companies that take the time, and teams, whether be them innovation, IT, AI, whatever label you want to put on them, or even the operational units, when they actually take the time and they say, look, we have a few things that we can improve. These are the things. We're going to try several AI solutions. We'll try several other tactics, and we will get there. And this is what I want to achieve in year one. This is what I want to achieve by the end of the first 3 years, and so on. And when you see that type of thinking, you know they're in it for the long haul, and you know that there will be a possibility to actually co-create. Whereas when you hear, oh, we're testing 20 tools every month, what you're hearing is, I've got a lot of noise and fury signifying nothing, because I'm not starting from the business problem. And I'm not looking at this as a long-term transformation. I'm just having some fun with some tech. And I do think the market is for now more leaning towards the playing around with the tech, but I do feel that it's changing, because every conversation that I have recently actually, especially with more executive leaders, actually goes towards, we are transforming, we're just not sure how to do it yet. What are you doing about it? How can you help? Do you understand how we work? Can you advise? Do you have some patience to work with us rather than just push product? So it is changing, but it's taken a while to get out of the tech playpen, I think. It's coming.
That makes sense, yeah. Another question I had was, so we talked about that the companies should measure all these different KPIs. How should they handle potential trade-offs between them? So perhaps an AI initiative leads to more productivity but lower quality, or the other way around. Where would you set where would you set the balance between these different KPIs?
This is a very individual choice for each company, and I think it will deeply, deeply depend on their market positioning. If you take a company that is in a highly commoditized industry, that is facing huge price competition, that is facing, to top it off, a stock market scrutiny, for example, in terms of the quarterly earnings, the reality is that in most scenarios, they will push for efficiency at all costs, because they are facing that type of competitive environment. So they can indeed make a quick trade-off, and generally they will, when it comes to cyber risk and when it comes to major threats to their operational systems. I've even seen that one fail. So believe it or not, every now and again, cost efficiency trumps cybersecurity. I mean, we wouldn't have half the media articles we do today if it didn't. But then you have companies that are in premium sectors. You have companies, for example, everything that is professional services, that in reality is based on human talent, expertise, and networks. And there, what matters is that your people get smarter, that your people acquire new skills, that you're actually advising better in a more qualitative fashion because of AI. So there, I think the trade-off is not that difficult to make, because you're gonna push for efficiency up to one point, but there is a limit. You'll never push it at the expense of reputation. So I think that particular market is lucky, if you will, because they're a bit more balanced in how they look at it. And I think everyone that's in the middle, so when we're not talking premium, we're not talking super commoditized, if you're in the middle, it will go back to organizational values. It will go back to the corporate culture, because if it is a culture that is 24/7, that is very much pushing efficiency at all costs, output at all costs, then there's very high risk that AI will be used in that direction, and sooner or later, some accidents will happen. Whereas if the company culture is more long-term thinking, I would put it, it's more around cultivating capabilities for the long haul, then there's a chance of calibrating it more. Personally, I would really advise companies to look first at their market conditions, and secondly at their values, and then settle on what they want that strategy to look like. And ultimately, that decision, once again, will rest with the C-suite, because I've seen companies that really push on the capabilities because the transformation is driven by learning and development / HR, and others where it's driven by finance, for example, and it's deeply correlated with efficiency. So it's deeply individual.
Yeah, and I think this strategic rationale that you just described makes so much sense. And then when I look at some of the experiences I made with different companies, and they are all different. There's not all the companies are the same, of course, but some of them, I feel like they develop these KPIs and the strategy, how they want to measure them for the AI initiative on that project. So there is not this overarching thinking of, okay, which KPIs would be prioritized if there is a trade-off on these kind of things. Does it make sense for a company to develop something like a blueprint or a framework to measure AI effectiveness for different initiatives that these teams can use and apply for these projects?
I'll do you one better. It exists already. And it's funny because it just refuses to transition into the innovation / AI IT space. It's called portfolio management. If you're using Trade Republic, which I'm pretty sure you are, unless you're on Robinhood, it's exactly the same thing you need to do. The infamous 40-60 with the bonds and stocks, it's exactly the same thing. I've always applied, but I am in the minority here. I'll be the first to say. I've always applied a portfolio management strategy to all innovation projects. Generally, you're absolutely right. Companies will tend to look at one particular project and get super anchored on it, and therefore create that mental anchor of, well, if that didn't work, nothing will. Instead of just saying, look, I'm not going to put all my eggs in one basket. I'm going to look at the money I have to spend. It might be a huge amount. It might be a very small amount. But I'm going to invest it across several projects. And for each of them, I will have KPIs. But at the end of it, I will be able to actually determine their impact on my customer experience, on my efficiency, and on my capabilities. And that can be done in something as simple as an Excel. And, yes, there are ways of measuring it via automated system. Yes, you could write a code or you could ask Claude to do it. But if you want to stay in the good old Stone Age, you could also do it via an Excel and be able to report the same numbers. It's the thinking behind it that matters, because at that point, you basically have a matrix where you're looking at things per project, but then you're actually calculating the impact on the overall portfolio. And if you take it a step further, you can even see where you have gaps and overlaps, because that's when you'll actually see who's who's making up the early adopters and where you need to put more resources and for the adoption. It's just, to me, it never ceases to surprise me that the whole portfolio management approach, which is tried and true, is not applied more in AI and innovation. It's quite extraordinary.
Right. And then as the one who's managing this portfolio, you have also this much better opportunity to compare the different initiatives and to perhaps also see influences from certain functions in the company on the effectiveness of these AI initiatives and things like that, right? So this is exactly what we described before, that sometimes it can be very difficult if you just look at one project and the KPIs to really define what are the root causes, why something worked or didn't work. If you have this overarching overview, it's much easier. Plus, the different teams that work on the AI initiatives have already a preset of KPIs that they can measure, and they can maybe add their own KPIs to it, but they have something to start from and they don't need to think from scratch every time. I guess another question would be around the communication of KPIs. So in the past, I have been working on a project where it was about measuring customer experience KPIs. And this company had actually a way of communicating this very openly to the whole organization, because it was around, like, the whole idea of the company was around maximizing customer experience. And there was, for example, if you would enter the lobby of the headquarters, you would see a screen in that lobby where you see the current values of these KPIs. Is that something that you think is also suitable for AI, or is that totally different type of KPIs and doesn't belong on a screen in a lobby?
Honestly, I kind of like your screen in the lobby idea. I would just be very discerning about it, in the sense that, once again, AI is such a contentious topic, and you're really starting to see the pro AI tribe, taking up arms against the neo-Luddites and so on. And instead, when you look at AI as what it is, an extraordinarily powerful set of tools that you apply to make your clients' life better, your people's lives better, your stakeholders' lives better, and you communicate that impactfully, it can be extraordinary. Because on that screen, rather than saying, we have saved 272 hours of our people's time, so we got 20 more clients in, you can say, we've actually enabled 10 of our people to go home early and walk their dog, or to take a volunteering day. So, the message can be as simple as, thanks to AI, last week, 300 people around the world in our firm were able to do a volunteering day, because we've automated some of the admin tasks and freed them up to do what they care to donate their time to. Or we have, 2,000 happier clients because we've used AI to automate some of their demands so that they no longer have to run reports and so on. So I think with communication, it's always about what you're trying to say. And when you're communicating KPIs, I always remember my first year statistics professor saying, there's lies, damn lies, and there's statistics. And with statistics, you can turn it in any way that you can, and they can be very powerful, but you still have to go back to what problem you solved. And that's where I think, if on the screen you see AI having enabled extraordinary client experiences, or having given people a day off and so on, or their weekend back in some cases, then it's a winner of a communications perspective. It's all about what you're actually communicating about.
I'd like to take one look into the future as well, towards the end of this episode. At some point, I guess we will move beyond that phase where we are all working on AI initiatives to get it all started. And we will get into this phase where AI is just a regular part of how your organization is run. How would you say, does this change the measurement of KPIs as well?
Honestly, I think we're entering the most difficult part of the curve, because in most organizations, the superficial adoption of AI is done. So the playing around and experimenting, the selection of the major models or platforms they're working with is done. So AI has become part of the toolkit up to a certain point. However, it is very far from being embedded in the way we work. And that's the case for all companies. So this is the point where it needs to go into that deep level adoption, where each team looks at the toolkit they have, potentially gets more tools in, depending on each team's needs, and really starts working with them to redefine those workflows and to look at the key things that they're performing, the key value chains that they own, and how they can be made better, either qualitatively or from an efficiency perspective, and so on. And I think that's going to be a pretty rough ride over the next few years, because most people, especially seniors, once you've done a job for about 10 years, it's become part of your habit. You know it by heart, and you have quite a few assumptions that you work through, which means that when somebody actually asks you to draw that process, unless you're a process management maniac, you're not going to be very much at ease doing so, but it needs to be done. So for AI to actually deliver what we expect it to deliver from a transformational perspective, to enable people to do higher value tasks, to let us do a lot more with what we have today, because let me just make it very clear that I don't believe for a second in any kind of AI job apocalypse, period. And The Economist just confirmed my belief this week through a special report on the matter. But we can do a lot more with what we have today, with the skills we have today. For that, though, each and every one of us has to take the time, has to go into the detail of the key processes, and then afterwards go one step higher and look at cross-business unit processes and re-engineer those. I'm not going to lie, it's not the most exciting work. It is truly built for highly patient, highly detail-oriented people. I'm not necessarily part of that fortunate group, but it needs to be done for us to get real ROI. And I think that's where AI enablement, so the actual creation of an AI team that works with each unit, that brings that AI expertise into each area and helps the teams through the thinking process, is actually not that bad of an idea. I'm not much one for evangelists when it comes to just, hyping up the technology, but when it comes to doing the actual work, the process redesign and so on, it's absolutely necessary. And I think this is where we'll be able to finally tell the winners from the losers in terms of the ROI that people are getting from AI. That's where we'll be able to see who's invested in the transformation, who's put the resources on the table, who's had the patience to redesign organizations, and who hasn't. So I would bet that will come in, anywhere between 3 to 5 years, but that's just my conservative bet.
That makes a lot of sense. And do you think there is also something like a growth ambition in terms of AI? So we said, okay, now maybe 30% improvement as possible, productivity improvement. Is there something like an ambition? Okay, but in 2 years, we want to be at 40% and then at 50% and so on?
I think it should be looked at as a year per year improvement curve, but I do think it will diminish. So returns will diminish over time because the objective cannot possibly be 100% in 5 years. In the case of certain processes, certain can be fully automated. I absolutely agree with you, and run by AI. Others probably shouldn't, simply because they have a very strong qualitative human component to them. So yes, it should be looked at as a timely process. You're absolutely right. I'm just not sure how exactly that will move forward, because I think for now people are even struggling with this year's ROI, let alone a 5-year plan. Yeah, you could look at it as kind of a decreasing curve of returns, couldn't you, if you wanted to?
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Catalina, for this conversation. It was really insightful, and I think that we learned a lot how to properly measure the ROI of AI initiatives. I hope that also you guys who are listening or watching this episode were able to take away some learnings today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like the podcast, I'd really appreciate if you give it a like or if you subscribe to our channel. And otherwise, I hope to see you again at the next episode.